The courthouse was buzzing with its usual chaos. Lawyers shuffling through stacks of papers, defendants nervously tapping their feet, and the faint hum of whispered conversations echoing down the marble hallways. But in the midst of it all, one man stood out. His name was Marcus, a 32-year-old black man who had come to the courthouse that morning for what he thought would be a simple paperwork issue. He had no idea that this ordinary day would soon turn into something extraordinary, a moment that would leave everyone in the building speechless. It all started when Marcus approached the security checkpoint, just like everyone else. He handed over his ID, emptied his pockets, and waited patiently as the court officer, a stern-looking man in his 50s named Officer Daniels, scanned him with a metal detector. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of waving him through, Officer Daniels paused, looked Marcus up and down, and said, "Wait outside, I'll call you when we're ready for you." Marcus froze. Wait outside? The words echoed in his mind as he glanced around. Dozens of people were being let through without a second glance. Why was he being singled out? He tried to stay calm, reminding himself that this was just a misunderstanding. But as the minutes ticked by, the weight of the situation began to settle in. He wasn't just waiting. He was being treated differently, and everyone in the courthouse could see it. The tension in the air was palpable. People started to notice Marcus standing there, his posture straight, but his eyes betraying a mix of frustration and hurt. A young lawyer nearby hesitated, glancing between Marcus and Officer Daniels, unsure whether to speak up. A mother with her child in tow shot Marcus a sympathetic look before quickly looking away. Even the other court officers seemed uneasy, shifting on their feet and avoiding eye contact. But no one said a word. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. He knew he had every right to be inside that courthouse, just like everyone else. But he also knew that speaking up could escalate the situation in ways he wasn't ready to handle. So he waited, his mind racing with questions. Why was this happening? What had he done wrong? And most importantly, how far was this going to go? Just when it seemed like the standoff would continue indefinitely, something shifted. A voice broke through the silence, a voice that no one expected to hear. It was Judge Evelyn Carter, a respected figure in the courthouse known for her no-nonsense demeanor and unwavering sense of justice. She had been walking by, on her way to her courtroom, when she noticed Marcus standing outside. Her sharp eyes took in the scene in an instant, the nervous crowd, the uneasy officers, and Marcus, standing tall but clearly out of place. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor with authority. "Officer Daniels," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Is there a problem here?" The entire courthouse seemed to hold its breath. Officer Daniels hesitated, his face flushing slightly as he struggled to find the right words. No, Your Honor," he stammered. "Just following protocol." Judge Carter raised an eyebrow, her gaze shifting to Marcus. "And what protocol would that be?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but he also knew this wasn't over. Judge Carter's intervention had changed the dynamic, but the real question was, what would happen next? Would Officer Daniels back down, or would he double down on his decision? And what about everyone else in the courthouse? Would they continue to stay silent, or would someone finally speak up? The answers to those questions would come soon enough, but for now the tension remained unresolved, hanging in the air like a storm about to break. As Marcus stood there, caught between hope and uncertainty, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was about more than just him. It was about fairness, about dignity, and about the kind of world we all want to live in. And as the seconds ticked by, one thing became clear. Whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. But before we get to that, let's rewind a bit. Who is Marcus, and how did he end up in this situation? What was going through Officer Daniels's mind when he made that decision? And why did Judge Carter, of all people, choose to step in? These are the questions we'll explore as we dive deeper into this story, A story that's about more than just one man's experience. It's about the choices we make, the moments that define us, and the power of standing up for what's right. So stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you and the entire courthouse speechless. Marcus had always been the kind of person who believed in doing things the right way. Growing up in a tight-knit community, he was taught early on that respect and integrity were non-negotiable. He worked hard, kept his head down, and never caused trouble. But life had a way of testing even the most patient souls, and today was shaping up to be one of those days. Marcus had come to the courthouse to resolve a minor issue with a parking ticket, a ticket he was sure he didn't deserve. He had paid it on time, but somehow the system had flagged it as unpaid. It was frustrating, but Marcus wasn't one to make a scene. He figured he'd go in, explain the situation, and get it sorted out. Simple, right? But nothing about this day was turning out to be simple. As he stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He couldn't help but replay the moment in his mind. Officer Daniels telling him to wait outside, the curious glances from strangers, the sinking feeling that he was being treated differently because of the color of his skin. It wasn't the first time Marcus had experienced something like this, but it never got easier. Each time it felt like a small piece of his dignity was chipped away. He clenched his fists, trying to steady his breathing. He didn't want to make a scene, but he also couldn't just stand there and accept what was happening. He deserved better. Everyone did. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Officer Daniels was grappling with his own thoughts. He had been a court officer for over 20 years, and he prided himself on following the rules to the letter. But today, something felt off. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the way Marcus had looked at him, calm but with a quiet strength, had shaken him. Daniels wasn't used to people standing their ground, especially not in a place like this. He told himself he was just doing his job, maintaining order, but a small voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts. Had he gone too far? Was this really about protocol, or was there something else at play? He glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of Marcus still standing there, and felt a pang of unease. But before he could dwell on it, Judge Carter's voice snapped him back to reality. Judge Evelyn Carter was a force to be reckoned with. At 58, she had seen it all. Decades of cases, countless defendants, and more than her fair share of courtroom drama. But what set her apart wasn't just her sharp legal mind. It was her unwavering commitment to fairness. She had grown up in a time when the justice system wasn't always just, especially for people who looked like her. As a black woman in a position of power, she knew firsthand how important it was to stand up for what was right. When she saw Marcus standing outside, something about the scene struck a chord. It wasn't just the injustice of it, it was the familiarity. She had been in his shoes before, and she knew how it felt to be singled out, to be made to feel like you didn't belong. She couldn't ignore it. Not today. As Judge Carter confronted Officer Daniels, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The other court officers exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. The lawyers and bystanders paused, their attention riveted on the unfolding drama. Even the usual hum of the courthouse seemed to quiet down, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under Judge Carter's gaze. "Your Honor, I was just following procedure," he said, his voice tinged with defensiveness. "We've had some security concerns lately, and I thought it was best to err on the side of caution." Judge Carter's eyes narrowed. She wasn't buying it. "Security concerns?" she repeated, her tone icy. "And does your procedure involve selectively enforcing these concerns based on someone's appearance?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He knew he was on thin ice, and one wrong move could make things worse. But before he could say anything, Judge Carter turned to Marcus, who was still standing just outside the door. "Sir," she said, her voice softening slightly, "would you mind stepping inside for a moment? I'd like to hear your side of the story." Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this was his chance to speak up. He stepped inside, the eyes of everyone in the room following his every move. The courthouse, usually a place of noise and chaos, felt eerily quiet. Even the sound of his footsteps against the marble floor seemed louder than usual. He approached Judge Carter, his heart pounding but his head held high. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady. "I just want to resolve this and move on with my day." Judge Carter nodded, her expression unreadable. She turned back to Officer Daniels. "I suggest we handle this matter quickly and professionally," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Unless, of course, there's a legitimate reason why this man shouldn't be allowed inside." Daniels swallowed hard, his mind racing. He knew he was backed into a corner, but he also knew that admitting he was wrong would mean facing consequences. Not just from Judge Carter, but from his colleagues, his superiors, maybe even himself. The seconds felt like hours as everyone waited for his response. But just as Daniels was about to speak, a new voice cut through the tension. It was a young woman, no older than 25, with a determined look in her eyes. She had been standing nearby, watching the entire scene unfold, and she couldn't stay silent any longer. "Excuse me," she said, stepping forward. "I couldn't help but overhear, and I think there's something you should know." All eyes turned to her, and the room seemed to hold its breath once again. Who was she? What did she know? And how would her words change the course of this already tense situation? The young woman took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. "I was here earlier," she began, "and I saw what happened." Officer Daniels didn't just ask him to wait outside. He made a comment that, well, it didn't sit right with me. She glanced at Marcus, then back at Judge Carter, her resolve hardening. "I think it's important that you hear this." The room seemed to freeze. Even the air felt heavier, as if the weight of her words was pressing down on everyone present. Officer Daniels' face went pale, and Marcus felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that someone was finally speaking up, but dread about what this might mean for him. Would this escalate things further? Would it make the situation better, or worse? Judge Carter's expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp, focused. "Go on," she said, her voice calm but firm. The young woman nodded, her gaze steady. He said, people like you always cause trouble." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud was different. It was one thing to feel it. It was another to have it confirmed. The room erupted in murmurs, the tension reaching a boiling point. Officer Daniels looked like he wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. Judge Carter's face was a mask of controlled anger, her jaw tight as she processed what she had just heard. But before anyone could react, the young woman continued. "I didn't say anything at the time because I was scared," she admitted, her voice trembling now. "But I couldn't just stand by and let this happen. It's not right." Her words were met with a mix of nods and uneasy glances. Some people looked ashamed, others angry, but no one dared to speak. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of a clock ticking somewhere in the distance. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward the young woman, but he also knew this wasn't over. If anything, things were about to get even more complicated. Judge Carter took a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew this was a pivotal moment, not just for Marcus, but for everyone in the courthouse. How she handled this would set the tone for what came next. But before she could say anything, another voice interrupted. It was a man in a suit, someone Marcus hadn't noticed before. He stepped forward, his expression serious. "Your Honor," he said, "I think we need to consider the bigger picture here. This isn't just about one incident. It's about the system as a whole." The room seemed to shift, the focus expanding beyond Marcus and Officer Daniels to something much larger. What did he mean by the bigger picture, and how would this new development change the course of the story? As the tension continued to build, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would justice be served, or would the system protect its own? Would people finally speak up, Or would silence prevail once again? The answers were still unclear, but one thing was certain. This was far from over. And as the clock continued to tick, the courthouse remained a powder keg, waiting for the spark that would ignite it. What would that spark be, and who would light it? Only time would tell.